For my research assignment, I decided to choose Malawi. The reason why I had chosen Malawi was because we had recently covered this specific country in a previous class taught by Dr. Schatzman. This was in Jeffrey Sachs' books, The End of Poverty. This paper will focus on a timeline from about 1981 through 2019 in an effort to track the progress made by the economic status, social development, and focus on independence. So since 1981, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and other countries have brought in economic restructuring to help Malawi since it is considered one of the poorest countries in the world. These programs had set objectives for institutional reform, elimination of price controls, and industrial licensing in attempts to liberalize the trade and social programmings. Malawi suffers from a vicious cycle, typically in the form of its booms and bust cycles. In 1994, Malawi released its new constitution that incorporated principles of decentralization. After its first president, Dr. Kamasu Hastings Banda, had taken control, there were many links to what would be considered the resource curse. A lot of what had happened was that it had become a rentier state. Its one major sector was in the form of agriculture and forestry estate concessions. And the deal for the rentiers became very disorderly, and the state became incapacitated on the back of structural adjustment and a political upheaval under Dr. Hastings. This disorderliness also happened in Beluzi's first term, the following president. The corruption became rampant, the government's capacity to follow up on the deals weakened further until the multi-party democratic system would emerge in the early 2000s. Many politicians and other world leaders from Malawi, they would instill policies that would cause the price to be changed, but before it would do that, it would let this news be known to its investors and many of its patronage systems, much like what we had learned in the week 5 and 6 chapters, where we were covering a lot of the development and institutional patronage that we had seen coming from places suffering from the resource curse. Under Banda, it was very autocratic. There were still bureaucrats influencing policies, but it was very much an autocracy in many ways. So it had a closed system of patronage. The rent space continued to the negative effects on the economy and the policies diverting from the rentiers that were linked to this patronage, and the development partners and political transformation from this regime to a very disorganized multi-party system in 1994. It caused very much suffering from clientelism. It made it hard for the country to allow the rentiers that were not linked to the system and new investors to come in and try to rebuff this broken system. Since its dependence on tobacco as one of its main exports, its reliance on agriculture and expanding its dependence on tobacco increased from 53% to 70% of its GDP from 2007 to 2008. Production of tobacco is also expected to decline by 36% as the farmers focus their attention on other agricultures that are more profitable. Another one is legumes, ground nuts, pulses, and other typical things like sugar and tea that are expected to be represented in its 2019 GDP as a whole. Since 2016, the country has been on economic contraction due to big tobacco being regulated and global disconnect from the industry as a whole. Due to the exogenous pressures from the boom and bust cycles, also a form of the resource curse Malawi suffers from, we had seen a lot of droughts, storms, crops, and 42.7 in relief funds since 2017. Malawi's severe drought conditions over the past few years also affect the boom and bust cycles. Unfortunately, they did not develop much infrastructure laws that would help it generate during these boom and bust cycles. In 2014, the revenues from local governments accounted for only 0.3% of its total GDP, 2% from central government, and 3% over the period of the Local Government Act. The National Decentralization Policy made it hard for local cities to govern these changes.